Well, let's continue. And now we will be talking to two experts who, like nobody else, know about the challenges in mental health sector are met by IDPs and how their mental state responds to these complicated conditions. Guglielmo, who is the head of Intercultural Communication in IOM, and he is now with us in Kyiv. Thank you so much for joining us. And online, we have Renos Papadopoulos, who is from the Trauma Research Center. So thank you. Thank you for attending this summit. Guglielmo, I'm going to address my first question to Mr. Ramos, and thank you so much for joining us. So in my hands, I'm holding your book, and this book has been translated into Ukrainian, and it's very valuable. Yeah, you also have it in Ukrainian there, so I just started reading it, and I know from this book that you value precise language, concise language in situations of collective grief, collective disaster. So this mental health term, it's used in this context. Please tell us why it's important to be precise when we talk about mental health.
Thank you. Thank you, first of all, for inviting me to this very important summit. I'm very humbled by your invitation, and I wish you all success. Yes, I think it is important for us to keep in mind that whenever there are these severe forms of collective adversity, a lot of confusion takes place in terms of our cognitive way of processing these experiences and these events. These situations are highly emotionally charged, and in connection with, coupled with the pressing needs that are very important, things need to be done immediately about so many important things, that create an overwhelming sense that makes it difficult for us to process things properly. Processing things properly means understanding the complexities of situations. Therefore, we resort to oversimplifying things, and the easiest form of oversimplification is polarization. That's why we say things in terms of black and white, in terms of either people being traumatized or resilient, which of course is a bit of both in every human being, etc., etc. More specifically, when we come to the issue of mental health, the difficulty is that we're using the term mental health for a very wide spectrum, a very long continuum from appropriate distress. For example, if there is war and there is bombing, etc., it's very appropriate that people experience distress. It would be abnormal if they didn't, and they thought that everything is fine and they carry on whistling or whatever, doing something else. So distress in that particular situation is appropriate, and it's useful, and it is healthy, and it is normal. And that is distress. That we use the word mental health for that, but also when you use the word mental health in relation to psychiatric disorders. So we don't make a distinction between distress and disorder. And if we don't make such distinctions, then we made a lot of errors in our understanding of this situation and in helping people. That's why it is important to have very precise understanding of the language and not allow it to be too used in terms of stereotypes.
Thank you so much. That's exactly one of the reasons why we have this discussion today. We want to have clarity with definitions and with how to cope with different cases. Guglielmo, I wanted to talk with you about things that improve mental health. also for Ukrainians that against their will had to flee the country. Now we talk about the hotline to support Ukrainians abroad with the support of IOM, which you represent, and the All-Ukrainian Program of Mental Health. How are you? That's the name of the program. It's been initiated by the First Lady, Olena Zelenska. Now please tell us how it works. What kind of calls you're getting from Ukrainians? So please tell us about how this works.
Sure. So the hotline is actually operated from within Ukraine, and it serves Ukraine and 6 other countries, from Poland to the UK to Lithuania. You can call the line. It's staffed with Ukrainian-speaking, mainly Ukrainian psychiatrists, clinical psychologist, psychotherapist, and emergency psychologist. So calling the number, maybe I should say the number for Ukraine at least, I wrote it down, which is 0800211444. Calling this number, you get initial support, so you can talk, with our operators. Then together, you can decide if you need more, and you can receive up to 6 or 8 sessions or counseling or psychotherapy, and if there is a need, also psychiatric consultations. Who calls? Those are people that for a series of reasons cannot access the existing systems. So displaced people, as you were saying, Ukrainians abroad has a problem with language. They cannot speak, the language of the therapist, so that's one. There can be a problem with stigma. So something that could be quite interesting is that hotline receive many more calls from men, not than from women. Women obviously call more, but then of the men that we have in other kind of our programs, So basically, because, there is a stigma between men usually seeking emotional support, it's easier for them to call rather than being seen going, to an institutions or a center. Can be also people who have logistical problems. What I want to say is that how we started, so we had this operation already in Ukraine before. It was a small one for COVID response, so because people couldn't go to services for COVID. Soon after the war, just a few days after the war, we did 3 things. We tried to trace our operators where they were. We contacted an important telecommunication company who gave us a cloud so that operators could respond from wherever they were in the world. And we launched an international campaign among the Ukrainian diaspora and the displaced Ukrainians, psychiatrists, psychologists, counselors, so on, whoever could dedicate even a few hours per week, to this response. We got hundreds of calls, and that's how we started immediately. So basically, with harvesting the capacity that exists already in Ukraine, but also among Ukrainian migrants abroad, and the ones who were displaced because of the situation. And that's our approach, really, because we are asking what you do. You have to work with the community, with the capacity existing in the community, and that's the role, and with an agency-based approach. Ukrainians know how to respond. You just have to help them in a moment of chaos problem, to be the catalyst of this existing expertise.
Дякую. Повернуся до вас трошки.
Thank you so much. We'll get back to that later. Now, Renos, we have a question for you. Maybe this question will sound strange for the wider audience, but we always focus on the bad impact of the war on mental health of people, and that's natural, that's logical. But let me ask about an opposite experience. Maybe there is a positive impact of the war, or maybe I'm saying nonsense.
No, I don't think you're saying so. I think it's very important for us to look at the whole range of the impacts from any adverse situation. And first of all, talking about this processing that I was mentioning earlier, we need to make a distinction between the nature of the event and the impact of the event. The nature of the event can be, of course, it's very negative, or is very negative, but the impact is not only negative, but there is a whole range of possibilities there. For example, if we look at you had an incredibly wonderful human being earlier on the program there on the stage who lost his limbs. And that person did not see himself just as a victim. He saw himself in terms of something meaningful that he was doing. In other words, he added a lot of other dimensions to that experience. And of course, okay, it's negative that he lost his legs, but his spirit, the fortitude of the human spirit there was so clear. So we need to look at holistically the whole person and how the impact of war affects them. And there we need to make a distinction, another distinction that we need to make in order to be more precise and avoid oversimplification and follow complexity. And that is that we say that people are victims of war or victim of disaster or whatever, but developing a victim identity is something different. The first is true, but here the person that you interviewed earlier is a victim of war, but did you see him treating himself as a victim? No. He treated himself as a survivor, as a person who embraced life, as a person who is ready to not only help himself, but others. So pinning that person in an invalid position and seeing him exclusively as a victim would actually strengthen his victim identity. And we all know the negative effects of the victim identity, which is passivity, extended dependency, learned helplessness. We learn to become helpless, to depend on others. And a person may deteriorate more, not from the original impact of the adversity, but from the effects of the victim identity itself. This requires a lot of complexity to understand, and this is what I am endeavoring to clarify so that we don't fall into empty stereotypes.
Ще додатково, я так розумію, що в принципі кожна людина
Right, I understand that every person really has to be able to find this positive impact inside himself or herself.
Дякую. Guglielmo,
Thank you so much, Guglielmo. Let's get back to you. And when I was mentioning all of your achievements and your title, you have a lot of experience working with IDPs. And like nobody else, you understand the challenges, the needs that such people have. Now, in your opinion,
ситуація, яка є зараз,
the situation we face in this continent,
відповідає тим викликам?
is it corresponding to the challenges that exist? Do we want to improve the program? Do we want to make it bigger and work more on improving the mental health situation with IDPs?
Obviously, so the situation of people who are displaced, inside a country or even internationally, is peculiar, because obviously they cannot choose the place where they end up. It's a forced movement; they are not prepared, and so while all Ukrainians obviously suffer, from the effect of the war, that are profound, at community and individual level, for displaced people there is an added burden, that is the one of being often discriminated, at least initially where they arrive. There is the issue of not having social networks, known networks around you and so on. And there is also the issue of not knowing where to access services, because you are in a new place, very confused. Abroad, there is also the issue of language, which is not a simple one, to accommodate. I want to make an example, for instance. This has also to do with identity. So whenever you move somewhere else, then you have to understand you have an identity that is in between. The place where you come from, the place where you arrive, you have to balance all these factors. I make a very simple example. For instance, adolescents that moved out of Ukraine, they were given a choice. So you attend school in the new place, or you attend school remotely, within Ukraine, with your old schoolmate. At the beginning, they made an identity choice. So I want to still to be the person I was. So I attend school in Ukraine remotely. Now what happens is the one who are 17 and so on, they ended the school, and they found themselves in the new place without knowing the language and without the network that others were able to create because they went to school and they met new friends. So they are suffering more than the others. These choices, are usually choices that we don't have to make in life, but the displaced people will have to make. What is the response then? As Renos was saying, is not concentrating on psychiatry, and psychology, but is to start from the very beginning. The very basic part is know your rights, know your entitlements, claim for it, because these give you agency, give you an identity, in the new place. The second is try to recreate a sense of community as soon as possible. We saw it from the research, that the First Lady Initiative commissioned. For Ukrainians, staying with friends and family is the most important thing. So try to recreate these networks where you are. Follow your interests, your interests that you had back home. If you follow it in the new place, you will find immediately people who share the same interests, and the same passions. And then for the ones who are struggling more, then you can have counseling services. And obviously, in any population, there is a percentage of people with severe mental disorders. These increase in war situations, and therefore these need to have a response. A suggestion that I have for families, in particular, parents usually tend to focus on the need of the children, disregarding their own needs. But to be a functional family member, you have to be well yourself, wherever you are. So take care of yourself, please. So that's the first thing. That's the best way also to take care of your children. Create spaces in the family where everything that Renos was saying can be acknowledged. The suffering, obviously, because there are challenges, express it, but also the fact that you are doing fine. You and your children are doing fine. Recognize the resilience, that is within that space, and also the activated development, the new things that you are learning, and they make the experience, a positive one. The very, very last thing that I want to say to kids, especially the ones that are displayed. Sometimes it's difficult to express your feelings in war, and what you face may be something that is very difficult to describe, So you don't have necessarily to talk about it, but try to video it, write about it, sing it, rap it, act it. Find your own way to express, communicate, and relate. There is not only one way. It's not only talking therapies, because that's unfortunately what psychology is mainly made of. Find your own way, as long as you are able to express and relate. When you express, you are able to relate as well.
Дякую за дійсно цінні поради.
Thank you so much for this wonderful advice. Dear colleagues, you just spoke about the research that was held prior to the summit, and unfortunately we're out of time, but anyways, I want to ask this very quick question. So, based on this research, a quarter of respondents, 25% of adults and adolescents, said that they would feel discomfort talking about their mental health with a specialist. Now, why? They said because it would impact their ability to retain their jobs, and also they will feel ashamed before their family members or friends. So, what are we going to say to this 25% of respondents to change their mind? So, very quick response from you.
If I can say, 25% is a good figure. If we ask the same question a few years ago, it would be much, much higher, because people have fears, about mental health. For me, there are two issues. Change the culture. What your First Lady is doing is great in that sense, because he comes from the top, he talks to the people. A very simple question: how are you? Because that's mental health, at the end of the day, So this is one thing, Also provide people with self-help tools so that they can try them and see how they can help themselves, It's not just pure science, something. Then I think, especially in Ukraine, there is another discourse that has to be done within the health system, because of your history, mental health was considered something to be institutionalized. You have internats. These are scary places. People don't want to end up, in these places. So there is also a necessity to reform the mental health system to open up to the community so that care can be received at the primary health care level, so that it's not as scary, as the other, but also that that whatever is your condition, as Stephen Fry was saying before, you are still an active member of the community. So these are the two ends. What you are doing, what the country is doing. I'm not going to teach you, because you are doing it probably is one of the best examples that has been here in the world, but also changing structurally the health system so that it goes more towards the people rather than vice versa.
Дякую вам. Ренос, від вас теж хочу почути.
Thanks a lot, and Rada, I would like to hear your thoughts on this.
Yes, my colleague and friend Guglielmo has said that very, very clearly. But what I would like to add is that the effects of this situation are such that we should not see them exclusively in terms of mental health. People are affected ethically, morally, spiritually, in so many other different ways. There is a saying in all languages and in all cultures that whatever doesn't kill you strengthens you. We should not forget that these situations also offer a possibility for people to renew themselves, to see themselves in a new way. Your previous soldier who was talking there was talking about the choice that people had in terms of what their priorities of life were going to be. So we should not forget that people do have certain choices. We don't have choices whether the war should be there or not, but we do have choices how we respond to these difficult situations. And it is important for us to realize that there is an enormous possibility for personal transformation in these sort of situations. And again, what we heard was that the family support, the community support matters much more. So what we were saying at the beginning, when we use the term mental health loosely, people respond and are concerned that mental health may refer to psychiatric illness. No, mental health also can refer to ordinary responses to abnormal circumstances. And there is a lot of clarity that needs to be introduced there. Otherwise, with this loose language that we use, people are scared and they don't realize their agency and the choices that they have. I was impressed. He said that many times. He said, what do you want to do? What are your priorities of life? What priorities are you going to make in your life? It shows very clearly that people do have choices, but in order to exercise the choices, we need the people surrounding us to help us with those. And we need to look at appropriate community supports, which, as we know, in your country, you are doing it marvelously well. Thank you.
Дякую вам і дякую за прекрасну розмову.
Thank you, and thank you for this talk, Renos. We would always wait for you in Ukraine. Well, as soon as you're able to travel, our doors are open to you. And Guillermo, thank you for being here personally. Thank you, and see you next time.
It was an honor and a pleasure.